Good afternoon. Can you hear me? Great. Welcome. We are so happy to have you all here today. As of course you know, today you're going to have the opportunity to observe an interview between Emily Bond, our campus librarian, and Cynthia Bond, the author of CRC's One Book Selection. And before I call both of these women to the stage, I'd like to just briefly introduce them, and then I'll give you a little idea of how this event is going to run. So first off, the person conducting the interview today is Emily Bond. And Emily Bond is a librarian here at CRC with degrees in history and information science. She teaches information literacy and coordinates the research help services at the college. Emily has been actively involved in CRC's One Book program since its inception in 2010. Cynthia Bond, our guest of honor, is a New York Times bestselling author. Her novel, Ruby, was chosen to be an Oprah Book Club 2.0 selection. Ruby was also a Barnes & Noble Discover Great New Writers selection and an Indie Next Pick. A Penn Rosenthal Fellow, Bond attended Northwestern University School of Journalism, and then she moved to New York and she attended the American Academy of Dramatic Arts. She also founded the Blackbird Writing Collective in 2011. Cynthia has taught writing to at-risk and homeless youth for over 15 years, and she's on the staff at Paradigm Malibu Adolescent Treatment Center. Currently, Cynthia is completing her second book in the Ruby trilogy. Before I call Cynthia to the stage, I just want to let you know that we're going to begin today's program by having Cynthia Bond do a reading from her text. And once she's completed her reading, then Emily will join her on stage and begin the interview. So please join me in welcoming Cynthia Bond.
Hello. Hi. Thank you for having me. I do want to thank the One Book Committee. I just can't believe it's so amazing what they are doing with sharing my book with the different disciplines within the school. It's just fascinating. And Georgine Hotchkins for all that you've done. Where are you? Oh, she's somewhere back there. Okay, she's back there. And Emily, who's going to interview me, and Heather Tilson. Just everyone's made me feel so welcome. And it's also very interesting. I'm working, Ruby is a trilogy, and it's very interesting to look at this now because I have been working on book 2. I've been immersed in book 2, and I haven't looked at this in over a year, so it'll be really nice to remind myself. Ruby is basically a love story, but it's a story of a woman who has just suffered unbelievable horrors in her childhood and her life, and she's gone slowly mad, and she's living in this East Texas town of Liberty Township, and there's a very quiet church deacon who has been in love with her since they were children. And he sees her, it's a very rainy day, very similar. I know, it's very similar to today. It was after the big Brownsville hurricane of '67, after 86-mile-an-hour winds crashed into Corpus Christi and rippled all the way east to Liberty Township, splashing the edge of West Louisiana and flooding the banks of the Sabine. It was after the bending of trees, of branches arching to the floor of earth, after Marion Lake had swollen up and washed away Supra Rankin's hen house and Clancy Simpkins' daddy's Buick, and the new cross for the Church of God in Christ. Hurricane Beulah had come, Ruby's 4th year back in Liberty. It was then that she saw Ephraim Jennings. She had lain in the stagnant pools thick with mud and browning leaves. She had knelt before a cracked sugar maple tree and lain in the collecting waters, letting the thick fluid cover her like a bedtime blanket. She felt her skin melt and slip from her bones, her heart, spine, and cranium dissolve like sugar cubes in warm coffee. She had been muddy waters for 3 hours when Ephraim found her, her nose rising out of the puddle to inhale and dipping back to release, out and back, rhythmic like an old blues tune. He did not scream. He did not leap over the tree. He did not scoop into her water center to set her free. For Ephraim did not see what anyone else passing down the road would see, a skinny, dust-brown woman with knotted hair lying back flat in a mud puddle. No. Ephraim Jennings saw that Ruby had become the still water. He saw her liquid, deep skin, her hair splayed like onyx river vines. As rain began to fall upon her, Ephraim saw her splash and swell and spill out of the small ravine. Ephraim Jennings knew. That is when Ruby lifted her head like a rising wave and noticed Ephraim. In that moment, the two knowings met. They stared at each other under the ancient sky with a soft rain and the full wet earth. More than anything, Ephraim wanted to talk to her and tell her the things he kept locked in the storehouse of his soul. Thank you so much.
So, I'm very excited to be able to speak to you today. I wanted to, for the audience, have an opportunity to explore Ruby and also your writing and your experience with this book. So to start out, I wanted to just read a passage from, it's actually in the introduction of a book of short stories called Trigger Warning by Neil Gaiman. And he says, what we read as adults should be read, I think, with no warnings or alerts beyond perhaps enter at your own risk. We need to find out what fiction is, what it means to us, an experience that is going to be unlike anyone else's experience of the story. We build the stories in our heads, we take words and we give them power. We look through other eyes and we see and experience what others see. I wonder, are fictions safe places? And then I ask myself, should they be safe places? Ruby, the story is often very deeply disturbing, and you describe really raw and awful things, murder and assault. And I wonder what your feelings are on fiction, and should it be a safe place, and is it?
Well, first of all, I love that quote. That's amazing. I need to put that on my office wall. That is so wonderful. I mean, it's really interesting because I don't believe it should be safe, but if you're a writer and you ever decide to go on Amazon and look at your reviews, let me just tell you, don't. Because unlike reviews from newspapers and critics, a lot of the people on Amazon, some of them are shocked. They are like, well, what's wrong with her? Why would she write about these things? And I really like the idea of it not coming with a warning label. I can say, I mean, it took me, and I was sharing this, like really over 20 years to work on this book. It was originally 900 pages, and now it's a trilogy. And I can say that when I first started working on it, I was very young, and I didn't really like people that much. I was like just judgmental about the world. And what happened, so my book was really written in a way that would be like, look what happens, it's awful. But then, I was 20 years older, and I really grew to care about people. I really grew to believe in people. I believe that good is stronger than anything else. Love is stronger than anything else. And so then my book changed so that I really tried to take care of my reader and to gently share this information. And no, it's not easy information, some of it, but I also wanted to create just something beautiful. Like I wanted to make it a piece of art, even if it was about something difficult that was beautiful to look at. So that was what I strove to do. And you never feel that you completely achieve what you're striving for, but
that, yes.
but that's what I was working for.
Thank you. This month we're celebrating Women's History Month, and the theme for this year is "Nevertheless, She Persisted," and I think that that's so fitting for Ruby. Mm-hmm. And what would you say is most essential to Ruby's survival in the face of all that she experienced and what was done to her?
I really believe, and it may sound a little bit like a cliche, but it really is true. And this is from working with homeless youth. This is from working with survivors of all kinds of atrocities. I just think we as a human species are indomitable. I mean, you think about what we have endured, you think about what people have endured. So she's incredibly strong. One of the things that's not in this book but will be in the other is this idea that almost like the trail of tears, that tears that are shed sort of fall under the soil, and the pain compresses them into diamonds, and the blood that is spilled becomes a kind of jewel because we survive, we do persist. And also for Ruby, she finds so much in nature that inspires her. And, I can say that at a time in my life, I was going through challenges and somebody said, oh, write a gratitude list. And I was like, oh, shut up, I'm not going to do that. But actually, I was just thinking, I'm not grateful for anything. I was in Los Angeles. I didn't have a car. It was not good. But that wasn't the challenge, although for many, I'm sure it is. But for me, I was just looking out of the window, and I just saw this green tree, and it was so beautiful. And I just thought, that I can be grateful for the color green. And that was a starting point. And one of the things that was written long ago at the beginning of the book was Ruby connecting with nature. And one of the things that she said was that that she loved the audacious hope of rooted things. And that is the thing that over and over and over again, I mean, she found hope, and I do too. It's this idea, and I've shared this, but it's this idea that a seed, once planted, is never like, oh, I'm too depressed today, I'm not gonna grow, or doesn't continue to push towards the sun. And that, I think, is something that Ruby has, that desire, and it's her connection with that, but it's something that I have too.
She has the resilience of natural things.
Yeah, and even though things do not always survive, they still push towards.
There were a few characters that I felt like in the book maybe didn't have the same resilience that Ruby did. I'm thinking of Otha, and I'm thinking of Maggie. Maggie, I have questions about. I wonder. I don't know, and I hope that you'll tell us more about her in the future.
I too, yeah.
But I wonder, Otha, in contrast to Ruby, didn't really seem to be able to push through. Can you tell us
Yeah, I mean,
about
I think that I believe, and I was sharing this in the first group, I believe that some of us continue for those who can't. There are people who cannot move through, they're not able to survive, they fall. There's so many walks that have happened, the Trail of Tears, the long marches during World War II and the Holocaust, people falling behind in the snow on and dying, the slave ship, Middle Passage, people dying along the way. Everyone doesn't survive. The children who are currently in a child brothel, many of them do not survive. And it is through no fault, it is through no any lack of strength on their part. It's just that is the truth of life. And so those of us who are still here, we walk forward for those who can't. And as a writer, that is one of the things that has kept me writing, is speaking for those who will never be able to speak, speaking for those who will never make it out of those rooms.
Thank you. I want to actually read a passage because that reminds me of a section where Ruby was doing just that. Let me get it, if I have it here. In the book, Ruby has a connection with the spirit world. And I think that this, as you're talking about continuing for those who cannot, I'd like to read this passage and maybe we could talk about it a little bit more.
Yeah.
She flowed towards Ruby until she was inches away. They locked eyes, and Ruby knew that the girl had not merely drowned in that lake. Someone had held her under. Ruby put her arms around her, but because she could not hold air, the child walked inside of her body, curled there, and settled into her womb. Ruby held her belly and rocked. She hummed and said softly that everything would be all right now, and the girl let out a little burp and fell asleep. Ruby knew something about ghost children. Along with the hundreds of ghosts, they too had passed through her body. 7 had even taken up residence, but had been scared and wily enough to hide inside of her marrow. This new child was not so lucky. What is Ruby able to give these spirits, and what is that connection between them?
And yeah, I mean, that also is, I think, a continuation of the last question, I think that this idea of, and it's difficult sometimes because when I talk about the spirit world, it's almost as if you really have to enter into it, because there is
kind of atmosphere where these things live that's in Ruby and in the book. Those children, you know, something happens to her where at one point Ruby just doesn't believe there is a God. There's not a God for a spirit or a child to go to. She's seen so many difficult things, and so she wants to hold these children. And whether, as you read it, you believe they are real, whether you believe that they are figments of her imagination, whatever you believe, it is this idea that we are, you know, we are keepers. We watch one another. We take care of one another. But for Ruby, you know, she's a mother. And when I first started writing the book, I was not a mother. There's later in book 3, Ruby gives birth. Whoosh, don't tell anybody. But she gives birth, and I wrote her giving birth before I had ever given birth. And I was like, I am going to rewrite that section because it's like, that needs to change. But really, it's this idea of being a mother, and that keeps Ruby going as well, taking care of. And and I think that really is another thing. It is that desire to hold and protect that keeps her going.
So she has a period in her life where she goes to New York and she's separated herself from that motherhood. And when she comes back to Liberty, she's not at the right Liberty yet, but she receives her own child again. So how was she protecting herself in that escape to New York, or what was the difference there?
Well, when she first leaves, she is following her mother because she's never met her mother. And something in Ruby that is a true story is that my aunt was murdered by the Klan, and she was 18 and very beautiful, and she was murdered. And all of the sisters, many of the family just scattered. I just said like milkweed in a strong breeze. And many of them, they were all very light-skinned, and many of them decided to pass for white, and that's what Ruby's mother did. And so she left Ruby. And she lied to herself and told herself she was going back, and she didn't go back. And so Ruby went to New York to find her. But once there, she has sort of a difficult life in the beginning, but then she gets to hobnob with Bukowski and James Baldwin, and I have to say, I love book 2 because she goes to Paris, and I'm not going to tell that much, but she goes with Mrs. Gladdington, who's sort of a patroness and also, you know, not her lover, but is drawn to her sexually, and she goes there, and she gets to, you know, meets Richard Wright and Maya Angelou. There was this whole community in Paris at that time, musicians. It was the 1950s, not the earlier. Anyway, I'm very excited working on that now. But, but part of Ruby was so exciting, being able to explore that world. And then she's pulled back because of Maggie. So she has freed herself in a way, but in a way she's never really freed herself. She's always, a part of her has always been captive. A part of her has always felt guilt. A part of her has always walked with this anchor, this pain.
Thank you. You've mentioned all of these people that she encounters, and one of the things I think you do so successfully in this book, and why I thought it was so wonderful for our college to read it, was the way you wove historical topics and issues of race and society and class all into the story. I imagine that was intentional, and some of it came from your family history. How did you decide what you wanted to talk about?
Okay, so I'm just going to be honest, okay? So what happens with me a lot of times is that I just have sort of I'm very structured. I believe in right and left brain. And so I keep a really clear structure when I work, but I also allow myself to just kind of travel where I'm taken. And so I just started writing about these soldiers in the piney woods. I never knew they were really there. Now, maybe I had heard my mother talk about it, and that's very likely. I'm not saying that's not a strong possibility. But then I started doing research, and it was fascinating. And there will be more about that probably in book 3. But basically, in these small black towns, all black towns in the South, the Army would basically go there and occupy these areas and do Army maneuvers. So basically, one can imagine if you have an occupied area, what might happen to people. I never knew that had happened, and that's one of the things that's so fascinating about working on something, whether it's some memory that has come that you've heard when you were 5, whether you're just writing and you see something that you think would be good in the book, whatever it is, I love that. I love exploring the past. And the truth is, when you do that research, very often you don't get to, I had so much research about that and very little, just that one little section went in, so.
But I think it's successful because a lot of our classes, we explore things from an analytical perspective. We step back and we're looking at the facts and the events and how they unfolded. But what I thought was so powerful about Ruby was we were immersing ourselves in the experience, what it must have been like to be part of the Great Migration, and the reasons why a person would leave, and what it must have been like to be Otha in a mental hospital being experimented on, essentially.
Yeah,
right?
That was, and that was just such an echo to so many things that happened, at Tuskegee and over and over again. For if you've read Colson Whitehood's The Underground Railroad, which I highly, highly recommend, he talks about that quite a bit, and it happened. And so looking into that, investigating it, but the reason I write fiction is that that's how I love to learn. I love to learn through stepping into someone else's shoes. That's me, and so that's how I like to share information. And you can get all kinds of amazing things in as long as they're part of the story. I had a teacher, John Recchi, who wrote City of Night, an amazing guy, and it was one of the seminal books for gay men in the 1950s. It was one of the first books, and one of the things he said is, you never write to be political. Like, you don't, if you're writing fiction, you don't write with the idea that I'm going to carry this banner, but you have the banner in your heart, you know what you want to say, and you focus on the story, and then it comes out because it's all connected to the story. So, I believe in being very political in your work, but if that's your goal, your story will not be as strong.
Thank you. One of the questions that we had from our interpersonal communication students was exactly that, kind of your purpose in writing and how that was reflected in Ruby. And
Well, my purpose, my dad was, both my parents were academicians, and my dad, I'm related to Julian Bond, who was a very, very well-known civil rights activist, and founded the Southern Poverty Law Center, and just that whole side of the family, they're very political. I was on a college campus, and you'll get an idea of how old I am, but I was just sharing, my mother has told me not to tell now because I don't know why, she just wanted me to tell. But in the late 1960s, early 70s, I grew up on a college campus, which basically tells you how old I am. But what was interesting is I saw protests. I saw the police shoot a young black, I didn't see it, but we went to the funeral, my father saw it, of a policeman shooting a young black man who was protesting. We carried signs. I was with my mother when tear gas was thrown and we escaped. So I grew up in a political family. I grew up with my mother. She was a community college president for many, many years and then a chancellor. And everything she did was about, and I think the community college movement is all about bringing people to education who don't have that opportunity sometimes. And so everything my family has done, my mother, she was president of the NAACP when I was growing up. I used to make calls for everything in my life has always been about social justice. And I have a lot to say about the hypocrisy of religion at times. I'm not against religion, but there can be a lot of hypocrisy within that at times. So everything I believe is in the book, but my characters believe it. Yeah. And it is, again, a part of the book. But I do think that part of being a writer is to try to create change. I really do. But again, if that's your goal, you should write a nonfiction piece, you should write a series of essays. But it still is my purpose. It's why I write. There is no other reason to write than to try to be of service and to try to help people. That's it. And to fulfill that creative urge, but I just think you have a responsibility. I really think everyone has a responsibility, whether you're a writer or you're not a writer, whatever you believe, whatever your truths are, to speak those out and to try to affect change.
Thank you. One of the things I think you explore so many of these issues that you've brought up, the ideas of religion, the idea, and the maybe outward versus inward view of that. And you explore gender and you explore sexuality, and you've shared with us some of the things that have motivated you. One of the things I was intrigued by was the kind of multiple dimensions of each of those topics. So for example, with gender, there were traditional imagery. You had, wife, mother, virgin, whore kind of imagery, but then you also had Ephraim doing acts that would be traditionally attributed to a woman, like cleaning and cooking for his loved one. How did you, when you were exploring gender roles in the book, how was that reflective of your own experience or your life?
Right. Well, the first thing is, when you're a writer, you get to write about, your fantasies, basically. You get to write about what you wish would happen. And so, I think a lot of people kind of, I don't know, Paris, chocolates, flowers, but I have always been very messy. I've been thrown out of apartments because I didn't wash the dishes. I mean, okay, so a lot of problems with being messy. And so really, honestly, like one of my dreams was to have somebody come in and clean my house. I mean, honestly, like that was the fantasy. That was like, oh my God, this would be amazing. And so I wrote Ephraim. I mean, he just lovingly cleaned Ruby's house. He lovingly washed her hair. And I just think, I know that I don't believe that the roles that we're told exist. I think they can almost be a prison for people because we all have an urge to do all kinds of things. And so, but yeah, that was really, there was nothing political about that. I just wanted somebody to come and clean my house. But yes, I do explore some of those things about religion, because my mom grew up at a time when if she had nail polish, she was at church and the preacher said, if you wear nail polish, you will go to hell. And she had painted her nails and there wasn't nail polish remover. And so she literally took a razor blade and scraped nail polish off of her fingers, I mean, it was this idea that the apocalypse was literally going to happen at the end of the week, So she grew up with this fear and terror. And so that, I wanted to talk about that because I think so many things are done under the umbrella of being pious, under the umbrella of religion that cause harm, and that is not what true spirituality, true religion is about. And I thought it was important to talk about the juxtaposition of what we think is, what on the outside is, the pious person and what is truly in one's heart, and look at both of those things.
Thank you. Wow. Well, I want to take a pause now and have an opportunity for questions from our students, from our audience. So we have Georgine and Sandra who have microphones for us, and if anybody has a question. We've got.
Should I stand up? Oh, okay. Hey, I haven't actually read the book, but I just wanted to ask you, how did you know you wanted to become a writer?
Well, I wrote, in the 5th grade, the tragic story of our guinea pig who had passed away, Arnold W. Guinea Pig, but I always just expressed myself as a writer. But there was a hunk of time, a large period of my life where I did not want to be a writer. My mother said, this is what you're supposed to do. But my dad taught Shakespeare and speech and theater in college, and so we used to sit in the back of the theater and watch these plays. So for many years I wanted to be an actress, but my mother said she would not pay for me to go to acting school. So I went to journalism school, and then I left, and I was an actress for many years in New York, and then I found my way to writing. I think I've always been a writer because even when I was acting, I would write short stories about my character. But I really think, for people, it's, do you feel that you have a story to tell? Is there something you want to share? And it doesn't mean that writing is an easy process, because it isn't for me. at all, but it's, do you have something you want to say? And do you feel called in that direction?
Hi. So I have a quick question in regards to your faith and feeling like you can truly move forward. So with Ruby having taken those opportunities to support people along the way and everything, I feel like she had some internal struggle as well, still trying to keep herself moving. So do you feel like there's some like inherent motivator that kind of pushes you forward, something that gives you that hope no matter, you know, all the difficulties that you've walked through? For me, I'm trying to really get an understanding of what it is that keeps her moving, what it is that gives her that hope, because it is, like you said, very hard to see these people that just aren't gonna make it. So just trying to understand really what that is at Ruby's core that can motivate other people as well to kind of embody that.
Well, I think that just something that happens is that there is a survivor's guilt. There is survivor's guilt whenever you have survived something that others have not. So that's why I think Ruby has such a pull, because the guilt and the pain of just simply surviving is so incredibly difficult for her. And it's something that she has a lot of difficulty coming to terms with. But on the opposite side of that same coin is, because they didn't survive, that she has a responsibility to somehow move forward. And I think both things happen at the same time. I think both things happen. And I don't know, but I can tell you that when people fall, and I said this, but it is not through any fault of their own, and no one should be judged for that. There was a man in the first workshop that I did who's doing a photography book about homeless people, and he is putting them in different settings and then listening, writing their story down. And I just think, I've lived in Los Angeles and I've seen people literally screaming at homeless people, get a job, da 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 da. And I just believe that we are all linked, and those people who are not going to move forward, who are not going to go past where they are, or people who are just simply not going to survive, like many of the characters in my book. I just think it is because of them that you continue and you survive, but it's also, you have to find something in this world that you love. And, as difficult as, the book is, it really is about love and the power of love and the beauty, things that you see. And I think you have to have that. It doesn't have to be for a person, but we have to be pulled forward by that love.
So I'm currently reading your book right now. I was wondering what the inspiration behind the scene of Ma Tante's hut was, because it's talking about she has dried frog legs, snake rattles, things like that, and then Ruby's inside of the house with Ma Tante, and then Ephraim and Maggie are outside and they're physically fighting. I was wondering where the inspiration of that scene came from, and the inspiration of Ma Tante herself.
Okay, so I'm honestly not exactly sure where Moton came from. I don't know really where that character came from. She just, sometimes they just kind of descend and appear out of the you know, I love that scene, and I love them as children. But my grandmother is actually from New Orleans, and I did grow up with her just saying certain things. And we were these college kids. You know, my dad was a professor, my mom was a student, and then later, you know, a president of a. So we were not part of that world, but we would go home and visit my grandmother, and she would say things like, you know, you can't put your underwear on the line because someone might steal it. You know, she had a thing about hair and nail clippings. So some of that I grew up with, which was so vastly different than my dad's side of the family and what they were saying. But that, I think, sort of made its way in. But really, and then research, and I read Zora Neale Hurston, and she was an anthropologist, and so there's a lot of wonderful information in some of her books. But really, I mean, sometimes you're just writing and you see things, you're like, oh, what's that over there? Let me write over there. And I love that. Like, that's one of the things I love. You know, I've got my plans, but I love it when they get shattered and I get to explore a world. Because characters really, I believe that they have their own breath, their own life. And I really believe that she did. She decided she was going to visit, and I got to write about her. So.
Hello, good morning. So since you were writing and you began writing this book, and you're talking about how like some of these characters resemble a little piece of your history or even possibly some of your own personality. How would you know, like when you're writing, like did you know you're gonna have this many characters, or you're just free writing and going, or you had a plan from the beginning? And
I didn't have a plan. I had no plan. I first started writing this in a writing class. I didn't know it was a novel. I didn't even know it was a short story. And then I had a short story published that in an anthology, and then I began putting it together as a novel. But literally, the way that I did that, because I had scenes. I didn't have a computer when I started. I had scenes that I'd written in notebooks, and I would take each scene and I would write it on a Post-it, which I love Post-its, and I had these clotheslines in front of it, 2 pillars in front of my desk, and I would hang those up, and that's how it was like little handkerchiefs, and that's how I started writing my story, and I would just shift them around, and I didn't know all of those people would show up. I didn't know it was going to be such a long, rambling 900-page story. It was, yeah, that was very shocking to me too.
So you would say that your career today is like one example of a variation of facing social injustice by spreading your own creation?
Can you say that again?
So I'm asking, do you believe that your your career today is an example of one variation
Yes.
of your dreams that came true to fight social injustice?
Yes.
And
This is how I do it.
What would you say is your ultimate truth of what you've learned in facing social injustice today
Well,
that you could spread to us?
I believe there's this part of it. There's something in that James Baldwin wrote, and it was about the fact that he was talking about Black people in America during that time and how difficult it is to be human. And one of the things that he said is that when you can claim your humanity, when you own the strength of who you are, when you stand up to injustice, even if you lose your life, you are fulfilled. So it is this idea that being brave and standing up to injustice and standing up to the voices within you that are telling you you are nothing because that's what you've heard your entire life, doing that is the ultimate act of change. And life is far less important than owning your own humanity and your own power and your strength. And I know that sounds very odd, but I truly believe that you are not fully alive if you cannot do those things. And sometimes it feels like facing a change, even if your life is not on the line, it feels like, I mean, when I write certain things, there are times when it's painful or it's difficult and it feels like I'm gonna die if I do this. And it really is finding the strength to push through that fear, to tell that truth. And I believe that my activism is with a pen, it's with my little laptop. That is how I speak out. That's my way.
Hi, so I finished your book earlier this week, but I wanted to ask, a lot of times throughout the story you talk about the Chinaberry tree and how it like changes colors or loses leaves, and I wanted to know if that was a strategic piece of symbolism or if it was just showing Ruby's connection to nature.
The Chinaberry tree, that particular tree, I spoke a lot with a man in the East Texas Piney Woods Nature Conservatory. I mean, he was just this really cool guy. His name was Glenn something. I just thought he was amazing. And he told me a lot about the different plants that I was really fascinated about. But I did do research about the Chinaberry tree and how it is kind of a sacred tree. What I love about that tree is how the berries and the cycle of that tree, and how there are times when those berries are poisonous and they are deadly, and there are also times when you can eat them, and there are times when they ferment and the animals eat them and they literally get drunk. You know, you sit and you watch like a bird just kind of, you know, I mean, so there is a life cycle to that tree that I just think is fascinating.
Oh, I'm not going to stand up, but I have not read the book yet, but I will be. And my question kind of springboards off what the gentleman was saying as far as knowing how many characters you were going to have. I feel like if I began writing, I don't even know if I could stop at a trilogy. So what at this point makes you feel like that's what it will end up being? And is there a point when maybe you just take some of those passions and redirect them into a different character and then just start another book? But at what point do you think, okay, because it seems like you're pretty clear that this is going to be a trilogy.
Well, I wasn't in the beginning. In the beginning, it was a 900-page book that I would not stop writing, you know. It was, and then I stopped it, and I was sharing this in the first session that my mother, who read every page over 20 years, kept telling me it was a trilogy, and I kept saying it is not, it has to be one book. And, you know, because she could not be right because she was my mother. So, you know, no. And, but what happened is when I got my agent, she told me it was 3 books. And I was like, so that upset me. But, you know, I had to tell my mom she was right. But, so it didn't start as a trilogy. I think that if you are starting a project, you just don't even worry about that. You just write and you tell what story comes to you, and then you may look back over the editing process and go, okay, this needs to go here. And there were lots of things like that in my book, but I wrote it out, and then I sometimes might just keep one line, but some of it is going to. I'm working on a section now. I'm not even sure it's going to make it in the book, but I really love it. So I'm going to just keep writing it. I hope it fits in, but you write what the next indicated action is. You write what you feel. And then for me, it's going back and editing, and then I discover that. But you also kind of have to trust your gut. It sounds like on some level, you have a sense like, oh, this might or might not. You got to trust your gut as a writer. You have to. Because when my book was sold, I had an editor who I love, and she gave me really great advice, but then she told me that Ruby, who's sort of like she's a shapeshifter, she connects with different parts of nature, she said she should only do that with the Chinaberry tree, and I knew that wasn't right. But I was hired to adapt my book for Harpo Films, and for that, in that medium, it is good to have it just be one thing. But I said, no, you're wrong. So part of it is really trusting your gut.
Earlier you mentioned being on Amazon and seeing some negative comments. I was just wondering, how do you deal with negative feedback?
So I kind of, as a mom, I liken putting my book into the world as sending my child to her first day of kindergarten. She will encounter bullies, and my job was, now that she's 13, was to teach her that she has to know who she is. Those people who say that, they know nothing about her. They don't know her spirit, they don't know her soul, they don't know her purpose. So I really think of that as my book. Does that mean that you don't get hurt if somebody bullies your kid? Does that mean that you don't want to go, hey, you don't do that to my kid? It doesn't mean that you don't want to do that, but eventually you just learn that it's about trusting what you're doing, and that everybody is not going to like what you do. And if you write so that everyone will like you, you are not being honest and true to your voice. There are some people who hate what I do. There are people who love what I do. And so you just have to be true, but it is painful, and you do have to, remind yourself why you're doing it. You're not doing this writing for, I don't remember what her name, for Mary Goodbook, in Olathe, Kansas. I say this growing up in Lawrence, Kansas. There's nothing wrong with Kansas, but, I can't write for her. I have to be true to what I have to say and what my truth is as a writer.
Thank you. One quick question.
Hi, I've read your book and I finished it, and I was drawn to the imagery of the bathing, how Chauncey bathed Ruby, and then how Ephraim bathed Ruby, and then at the end, when the baptism where he goes into the water, right? Yeah, Ephraim. Sorry. Ephraim.
Oh, that's okay.
How Ephraim towards the end, the baptism, that imagery of again bathing, and then Ruby going through her own transition and confronting the Daibu. So was that the intent of using like the water as a cleansing?
Yeah, it is. And I really, the idea of baptism, the idea of leaving this old self behind and re-emerging as something new, and birth, this rebirth again and again, very much so. And at the, but for there are many different types of baptism throughout the book, and that imagery is I strongly believe in that spiritual act of moving forward, and really it's a kind of birth over and over again, which I think we have in our lives. So.
Well, we're just about at the end of our time, and I know that you all want more of Cynthia and more of Ruby. If you want more, if you haven't read the book yet, there are copies in the lobby, and please get one. I encourage you. It's a really fascinating book. It's so layered and so much to explore there. And if you want more of Cynthia, we have another panel coming up at noon. It is part of our Women's History Month lineup, and it's in the fight against sexual violence. And we appreciate having her along with some other voices and experts to talk about this topic. But as we leave, I listen to NPR's Code Switch podcast, and they always end an interview by asking their guest what is giving them life right now. And I know you're right in the depths of writing your second book. What is giving you life?
My kid.
Yeah.
My kid. I mean, she's 13, and she's got purple and blue hair. But at the bottom, we're not going to let her do it all over. And she was bullied a lot. She's a different kid. She learns differently, and she's just brilliant. And she really struggled, and now she's in an amazing school. She's in a rock and roll band. She's the lead guitarist. She's getting her belts in karate. And she just had a birthday party, and she walked into the room, and these kids who really love her like really good kids just rushed to her and they hugged her, and she smiled. And just seeing that, honestly, that is my kid being happy, that's it. That is what inspires me and gives me life.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing your time with us today.
Yes.